So welcome everyone. I think you hopefully have wandered over from streaming Olimpia Newman's film on your own, which is Colcha Circle, A Stitch in Northern New Mexico Culture. Let's just go into it so that we don't take too much of our time or get you too far away from the film that you just enjoyed. And I'll let Olimpia introduce her guest too.
So thank you for joining this session. I just wanted to reiterate that this video was made by the Española Valley Fiber Arts Center as part of a number of projects that the organization was doing to document textile heritage in northern New Mexico. I hope you enjoyed the video and learned a lot about Colcha embroidery, and of course not just the embroidery, but also the faces and the hands behind the work. So as you saw, this embroidery technique allowed women and allows women to express their culture through the art of the needle. Many of them who practice this art born today can trace their New Mexican roots 6 generations. Since the TSA Symposium is virtual, the marketplace that was planned for the entire conference disappeared. And so I approached the Española Valley Fiber Arts Center and with the idea to organize a virtual exhibit. And the result of this collaboration is amazing. And the collection of work that is on display virtually, the artist portraits, the biographies, illustrate how each Colcha embroidery artist came to practice this specific technique, and how it distinguishes their work today. So this exhibit is on view right now on the Española Valley Fiber Arts website, and Caroline is going to put the link in the chat so that you guys can access it right away. So if this video inspired you to try a stitch, just go to that website, pick up an embroidery kit, and then some yarn and a book maybe, and try it out. But before you do that, let's have Julia explain and talk a little bit more about her work, especially that amazing piece that is to her left, which is the Our Lady of the Assumption. So tell us what was something about the piece and what inspired you, and more the history of it. I mean, your own history there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you so much for having us. I'm Julia Gomez, and I live here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, a retired school teacher. This is a piece that I did a few years ago, Our Lady of the Assumption. This art is a history of the women that came from Spain through Mexico to New Mexico in 1598. And it is a colonial art. It started when the Spanish came in 1598 through 1821. The women that came up here didn't come to embroider, but they came, and it was a struggle to live. When they had a moment to sit down and embroider, they didn't have fine textiles or fine threads. All they had were the churro sheep that the Spanish brought in 1598. So they sheared the sheep, spun the wool, wove the textile, dyed the yarns, and then had a little time to sit down and embroider. At first, they were just looking for a piece of textile that they could, just a little rag, a piece of cloth, a piece of wool that they could just stitch together to make a larger piece. And they would stitch it all together, and then they would embroider on the face of that textile. And like this piece is completely embroidered to hide any seams from the back. Later on, when the Santa Fe Trail opened in 1821, they could trade for finer textiles and finer threads. So the art goes back to being more delicate. But during this period, this type of art is kind of coarse because it's all hand spun and it comes from the chewed of sheep. It's not merino, which was very fine and very delicate. So the back of this, I can't show it to you because it's sealed. So I brought this piece. This is a piece that I finished just when Olimpia scolded me that I wasn't working hard enough. And it's called Springtime Garden. And there's all hand dyed and hand spun wool. But we brought it to show you the back of the piece. This is what Colcha looks like in the back.
So pretty much when you see it, 90% or even 99% of the stitches are always on the surface.
Yes, and so this piece is completely covered because the back was just leftover pieces. But this piece, I wove it myself. I hand spun and I wove it myself. So I'm proud of my weaving also, though I'm not a very good weaver, but I do enjoy weaving. And so I can show off my weaving as well as my embroidery.
So let me just, we have a comment here in the chat room or in the Q&A. It's you really from Annie Barrett, and really love this film and hearing about the culture as themselves. I miss Northern New Mexico, and this was a beautiful experience. Thank you. I hope we are very proud of the whole of the tradition and also of all the artists that are here who practice it continuously. I mean, they basically do this work not just for themselves, also for sale, and a lot of the work you would see is obviously in museums, but you would also see it in churches, as just like the piece over there, that could be in an altar piece somewhere. So they are extremely unique in the sense that every single one is very individual, very personal.
Mm-hmm. And I like to do it because I like to tell stories. I'm a retired school teacher, and I love the history of New Mexico. So I always have a story to tell with my Colcha. And I'm not a seller. I'm an embroiderer and a storyteller and a teacher, and I want to teach. That's my goal, is to teach the history, teach the art, and keep it going so that it'll survive, because not very many people are doing it anymore.
So we have another question from a New Mexican or a resident. Polly, thank you for your question. She says, would we talk about the sabanilla and the SNZ? So the sabanilla first and then the yarn.
Well, I spin the wool and then I weave the sabanilla. The sabanilla traditionally was a utility cloth. This is what they made. It's called sabanilla, which is in English means sheathing, like the bed linen, because they would weave this textile and then make their mattresses, colchones, out of them. They'd fill them with unused wool that would have been washed, and unusable wool, and or with straw to make their little mattress so they could sleep on. And so if there was anything left over, the ladies would save it and eventually use it for their art, for their embroidery.
So the yarn itself is spun in one direction.
One direction.
Yes. And when actually it's very easy to take two yarns and then twist them together, and that becomes sort of, they intertwine. And which direction do you twist your yarn? S?
The S twist.
The S twist, yeah. So then two S twists would make up a Z twist of the double yarn. The sabanilla is mostly woven out of a singles yarn.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and then I'm not a very good spinner, but I worked really hard, because when you start out and it's straight and then it's slubby, straight and slubby, well, I kind of like that because it gives more depth to the embroidery. One of my very first piece I made for the cape of the statue, the patroness of Santa Fe, Our Lady of Peace, and I made her a cape. And then the scapular was, I wanted it to be a bright blue, and I had some practice yarn that I had dyed with indigo, but it was lumpy, but I used it. And so she's on an altar way up high, but then you can just see that the scapular just pops because of the slubbiness of the yarn. So it's a colonial art. I don't have to be perfect.
So we have another question from Vita. I'm from Canada, and this is a new tradition for me. So thank you for this introduction. My question after the video was why some pieces are completely covered with stitches and some not. I now understand that the background is hand woven and sometimes shows, but where the original pieces always completely covered?
Yes, until it came to New Mexico in 1598 with the first Spanish families. And so this was the type that was done. Once the Santa Fe Trail opened and they could trade for other textiles, then everything was prettier or finer, and it goes back to being a finer embroidery. And you could, and so instead of covering it, we just embellish it.
So there are, this is, and the video does talk about it, that every artist takes this art form in their own personal way. And some of them use commercial yarns. Some of them want to know from the very beginning, from even shearing the sheep to then spinning the yarn, weaving the cloth, etc., and dyeing it as well. This is an art that is practiced here by quite a lot of artists. So that's an amazing wealth of knowledge that we have here in New Mexico.
I was going to say that when I teach, I don't provide sabanilla because it takes forever to weave it. So we just buy a fabric at the store. And like Osnaburg is something that I start with my beginners. Mm-hmm. It's like a muslin, and it's not very expensive. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I teach. And then like one of our finest artists, Irene Bratner Martinez, she loves to use linen, which is another natural fiber. And her pieces are lovely. People use linen and anything that has an open weave, mm-hmm. because the yarn is thick. You have to be able to pull the yarn through.
Caroline, you were saying that you would like to answer this question live. Oh no, sorry, I'm reading something that's okay. Sorry, I misunderstood this. Still, one more thing to Vita's question is that, at the time, this was also a way. It was a protective blanket, a blanket that kept you warm, since we have pretty severe winters here. Even though summers, we are in the high desert and we have hot summers, then winters can be cold. So you wanted something that kept you warm. And by adding this layer of embroidery on top of the regular cloth, just increase the weight. And we say that in some cases, I mean, it's difficult to backtrack it today, but it probably increases it threefold. So the actual, you're creating a, you know, multi-layered fabric that way, and it's much warmer.
And it's called colcha because the women, colcha in English is blanket, because when the blanket was worn out or it may have a moth hole, instead of just mending it like this, they would do a bird or a flower or a leaf, and pretty soon it became a work of art.
Yeah. Another question from Canada, where we have standard at, question from Canada where we also have standards at craft markets. In the video, it sounds like there were some issues with the standard committee asking people to withdraw their products, tin, styrofoam. Do I sense some conflict there? You know, the market, the question is, where is the market for this art form? And the biggest or the most prominent market that exists in Santa Fe is the Spanish market. And the rules of the Spanish market have changed over centuries, as long as the market has existed, centuries, I can't say years. But they try to be very traditional. And it's in some ways restricting. And there were artists in the movie, in the video that you saw, that they were saying, I don't want to be confined to that kind of restrictions. Now, there are other opportunities to sell or to show the work, but the shows are not that prominent in the sense that the Spanish market is sort of the highest prestige.
Yes, and there's very few of us left in Spanish market, not because we don't want to be there, but we're aging out. We're all getting older. But if you're in Spanish market, you have to be traditional. You have to go back to the basics, spinning and weaving and doing the sabanilla and dyeing the yarn. But not everybody wants to do that. So in my classes, they can wander out and choose whatever they want to do, and I can teach them the stitch, because it's just the stitch that is important at this point. And there's people that combine the colcha embroidery with quilting, and they do wall hangings. Some people do it on their clothing, but they have to do it with a different type of yarn, because with wool, once you wash the wool, it tends to felt. So it really isn't good to put it on clothing.
That you have to wash.
Yeah, but if you can branch out and you can do cushions and baby blankets and different things like that. But if you're going to be in Spanish market, there are judges that want to keep you traditional, which is good, because with me, I don't mind, because I am trying to tell a story. I'm trying to keep the history.
And so that's what was the interesting part in the video, is to have at the same time the 11 artists that we brought together, and everybody had a different take. And I would say from the point of view of the Española Valley Fiber Arts Center, it is the mission to really promote the art form beyond just the tradition. And we want to push the limit, or push the sort of the creativity forward, and say, you know, it's open to artistic interpretation.
Yes.
As long as certain variables are kept in place. Most importantly, what the organization supports is that the artist explains what they have done themselves.
Yes.
That's really all there is. Mm-hmm. And so the exhibition that is currently on the Española Valley Fiber Arts website features quite a lot of very they're traditional pieces, and they're very contemporary pieces. So have a look, because you're going to see, and also read the bios. The most interesting is also the stories behind it. So Another question from Elena is, absolutely lovely film, so warm and passionate on display, very heartwarming, informative as well. Thank you for sharing these stories. Do the women in the film use their embroideries in their homes and in their clothing, or is it primarily wall and display art?
It's probably just artistic. People like to put it. We do a lot of table runners. They used to be called altar cloths, but now they're table runners, or a bed apron, and a lot of shawls. The women like to wear their shawls because we have the opera, and we wear our shawls to the opera. But there's some people that do a little bit of wearable art. You saw Nestora's jacket in the video.
Yeah, it is primarily an art of adornment of the house and of the church, places of prayer. That's where you see it.
And that's how it started. It was for the churches, because the Spanish brought their religion, the Catholic religion, and so they wanted to adorn a home altar, because that's all they had was a little home altar, or they put it on their bed. It's a tribute to the women who struggled to make a living here in the frontier. They brought a little bit of beauty to this frontier.
Another question from Vita about, thank you for, that makes perfect sense about the warmth of the fabric with insulation of the layers. Yes, it definitely does.
Yes, it does. But I have to tell you that Colcha embroidery is very slow. It takes, I would just get another blanket instead of depending on my sewing, because it takes forever to do this work.
But you actually jumped ahead. Vita has another question and said, thank you for all the, all that work, spinning, weaving, just makes the real product very expensive.
Yes.
And that's where the price differences come in. It does, a piece that is entirely embroidered has to really be more expensive because of the time of it takes to embroider.
Yes.
Yeah. But again, go to the website. You will see prices. Most of the work is for sale, and that way you will see the quality. You can enlarge the photograph. You will be able to see the details. One thing that you don't really see here, and I'm not sure if we can show it, but it's the incredible piling of the yarn on the surface. There is just, if you guys could, if the embroiderers could count how many stitches, and in the video there is a reference of how many stitches per inch, but not many artists go by that. It's that is one of the characteristics of this technique. And particularly here in the back, we've got this wonderful piece by Kay Lewis. It's called Fanciful Hummingbird, and it's very stylized. The hummingbird is stylized, but the yarn that's embroidered on top of the base cloth, and she uses other shawls. She's much more of a fashion forward and she more contemporary. That's her type of work that she does. But the piling of yarn she does also very well here, and you would be able to see it, or feel it. Follow-up question. One of the artists in the video mentions the curves characteristics of Colcha embroidery. Are straight lines and right angles to be avoided in traditional Colcha embroidery?
No, it's just that we do a lot of florals because it lends itself to movement, and not so much geometric, but just the curves and the movement of the yarn.
The comment, I remember that sentence in the video very well. It is by Maria, and it compares all the other traditions in embroidery. So these are not cross stitches. These are not other techniques, needlepoint. The technique gives the artist a sense of fluidity because of the stitch, and therefore it's very adaptable to organic design. In fact, from all I have seen, there's very little geometrics, and that is something that can be introduced, mm-hmm. but it's the fluidity that's really what marks this
embroidery.
Yeah, this embroidery. So another question here: new designs and coloring on these works remind me a lot of Native American beading art and clothing exhibits I've seen. Is there an influence in either direction?
In clothing?
Native American that has been in clothing, yeah. So is there any influence of Native American designs?
Well, it can be. People do like to include Native American designs in their embroidery. The Native Americans have their own special embroidery. It's called Pueblo embroidery. And I took a class in it, and it's very precise. And you have to have better eyes than I do at this age to make sure that the line is perfectly straight, because my lines would go like this. And I wasn't drunk. So, but it's very precise, and they do beautiful work because they embroider their shawls for their dancing ceremonies and their kilts. They do beautiful kilts, and the grandmothers do them, and then they pass them on to the children. They have their own style of embroidery.
So they are very different they're much more geometric looking, mm-hmm. and the type of embroidery actually lends itself to more geometric styles. So, however, I've seen some antique pieces where the background had like a woven, it was a woven design in it, elements of geometrics in that form. So there was, over time, there was cross influence. Less maybe today, but that is really, again, another expression of creativity by individual artists. So can you talk about the weeds for dyeing that were mentioned by one of the artists?
Oh, yes. The gold comes from marigolds, or also we have a plant called Colcha or Navajo tea, and that makes all the yellows. The blue is indigo, which was imported. It was a big trade item from South America. And so indigo is a plant, and it's cut off at the base and allowed to ferment. And then you get the blue, you get the blue. And so you get every shade of blue from indigo. The green is difficult to get. We're always in search of the perfect green. You can get green from wild spinach, we call quelites, and if I pick the wild quelites, then the wild spinach, I put it in a cast iron pot, and I will get sage green. But I'm always looking for like a forest green, so I have to take a yellow, the deepest yellow that I can dye, and then quickly dip it into an exhausted blue, and that will give me the green that I'm looking for. But it's, I do it the colonial method, just a little bit here and a little bit there. And so I get different shades of green. Sometimes I've got too much of blue, but it makes a beautiful turquoise. Mm-hmm. And what else? Oh, the red. Everybody loves the red because it comes from the cochineal insect that grows on the prickly pear cactus. And you brush off the cochineal, and then you crush it and you put it in water and it makes a red, but it's a deep, dark red. So you can add a little bit of the lime juice or lemon juice, any type of acid, and it'll change the pH and it'll turn a bright red. If you get too much, it's kind of on the orange side, but we use all the colors. When the red is used up, we get the pinks.
So the red is also, so the cochineal has been, over years, been imported to New Mexico.
Yes, it's been
you can today find some cochineal bugs on cactuses in Las Cruces, just on the border, but they're just not, efficient enough. Like there's not enough of them to warrant. So most of it today comes from South America. But I think at the time when they were trading, it could have been Mexico. So.
Yes, Oaxaca. Oaxaca is famous for their cochineal.
So Susan McCauley is in the chat room as well. Thank you for your question. Hello, the film is splendid. It was lovely to see everyone again. I'm curious, can you comment from your perspective how Colcha embroidery is regarded among the other Hispano arts, such as weaving and carving?
Well, there's always a place for Colcha embroidery because we're all the ladies and they're very good to the ladies. And though we have had men that do the Colcha embroidery, Annette Turk, one of our artists that you saw in the circle, she taught a young man who is now a lawyer at Princeton, I believe. He teaches. He's a professor at Princeton, and he does Colcha embroidery, and he does beautiful work. And then my friend Rick Rayo, he won first prize. He won a ribbon at the fair for his lovely piece, and he is a master spinner and dyer, and so.
It is an art form not only practiced by women, but as far as regard in the sense of, is a retablo considered higher art than a Colcha embroidery? I don't.
Oh, I don't think so. I think we're all pretty even because, one artist realizes how much work the other art is. Mm-hmm. I mean, because art is very time consuming. It takes a lot of work and time, creativity, and everybody we just respect each other. I don't think there's any competition and one is valued above another one.
So there's also a question about your beautiful necklace and her, so these are blossoms. Mm-hmm. And
this is called a squash blossom. And this was my mother's, who left this to me, and I wear it a lot. It's both it's at one time, this is what the horses wore in Spain for special occasions. But then here, the Native Americans picked this up, and this part looks like a squash blossom, and they do beautiful work. Mm-hmm. I mean,
so it's silver with turquoise.
Silver and turquoise. And then my dad, his hobby was a little bit of jewelry, and he didn't sell it, but he made a piece for each one of his children before he passed away. And so I wear his work all the time. I have his spirit.
Vita, you have to come to New Mexico, and you will see quite a lot of stunning silver jewelry with turquoise and other stones as well. So that's another thing we have here. We're getting thank you for Polly and Vita, and then Susan is talking about the floral journey, a Native American beading exhibition. Yeah, so maybe that's something that we can share to the ladies as a form of inspiration. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This was so much fun. Thank you for listening.
Great. Thank you, Olimpia. Thank you, Julia. Thanks for all of our attendees. Hereby ends our first day of our virtual symposium. Thank you so much everyone for being here. I know, if there's more questions that you didn't get answered, I just want to remind everyone that there's that attendee chat feature in the app, so you can continue your conversations outside of Zoom. And we'll see everybody tomorrow morning or very early morning or afternoon, depending on wherever you are, for another wonderful day.